The fluorescent lights in Gateway Regional Hospital's administrative wing hummed with the same steady rhythm they'd maintained for the past 8 years of my career. I'm Abigail Xavier, 32 years old, and I've served as a clinical quality coordinator here in Riverdale, Missouri since graduating with my master's in healthcare administration. What started as my dream job had slowly transformed into something I couldn't quite name, but the habit had been building for months. Gateway Regional prided itself on being a community cornerstone, a 400-bed facility serving 3 counties with everything from emergency medicine to specialized cardiac care. The hospital's mission statement, emblazoned on every wall and employee handbook, spoke of integrity, excellence, and patient-centered care. I'd believed in those words once, recited them during orientation sessions for new hires, and built my entire professional identity around them. My role involved overseeing quality metrics, coordinating with department heads on improvement initiatives, and ensuring our facility met all regulatory standards. It was detail-oriented work that required trust between colleagues, especially with my direct supervisor, Jessica Jackson, our clinical nurse educator. Jessica had been my mentor since day one, guiding me through the complex web of hospital politics and administrative procedures. She handled quality metric achievement bonus distributions, committee stipend payments, and continuing education reimbursements for our department. The first sign something was amiss came during a routine budget review meeting in late September. I'd been tracking our department's continuing education expenses when I noticed discrepancies in the quarterly reports. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger automatic audits, but enough to make me pause during my evening review of the Epic system logs. When I mentioned it to Jessica the next morning, she dismissed it with her usual warm smile. "Oh, Abigail, you know how these systems can be. Sometimes payments get coded incorrectly between departments. I'll have accounting look into it," she'd said, her hand briefly touching my shoulder in that maternal way that had always made me feel supported. But accounting never followed up, and when I checked the following week, the discrepancies had been quietly corrected without explanation. The corrections bothered me more than the original errors. October brought the annual Joint Commission preparation, and our department worked overtime ensuring every policy, procedure, and documentation standard met their rigorous requirements. During one late evening, I was updating committee participation records when I noticed something odd in the meeting attendance logs. Several entries showed my participation in committees I'd never attended, complete with detailed minutes and my supposed contributions to discussions I'd never been part of. I stared at the computer screen, the blue glow reflecting off my reading glasses, as I scrolled through months of fabricated entries. My name appeared in quality improvement committee meetings during times I'd been covering shifts in the ICU. Professional development committee sessions were logged during my vacation weeks. Each entry was meticulously detailed, professionally written, and completely false. The hospital's night shift brought a different energy, quieter, but somehow more intense. Fewer administrators roamed the halls, and the usual daytime politics gave way to the essential work of patient care. It was during these quiet hours that I began to piece together a pattern that made my stomach tighten with each discovery. Jessica's office light stayed on later than usual these past few weeks, and I'd noticed her working on spreadsheets that she quickly minimized whenever someone approached. Her usual openness had been replaced by a subtle guardedness that I initially attributed to the stress of accreditation season. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in early November. I'd stayed late to finish updating our quality dashboard when I decided to cross-reference the committee stipend payments with actual meeting attendance. What I found made me question everything I thought I knew about my trusted mentor and the institution I'd dedicated nearly a decade of my life to serving. The numbers didn't just fail to add up. They told a story of systematic deception that reached far beyond simple accounting errors. As I sat alone in my office, surrounded by the familiar sounds of a hospital that never sleeps, I realized that the betrayal I was uncovering would challenge everything I believed about professional integrity and the people I'd trusted most. The silence of the administrative wing felt different now, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to fully comprehend. The relationship with Jessica Jackson had been built over years of shared challenges and mutual respect. When I first arrived at Gateway Regional Hospital as a newly graduated nurse practitioner, she was the clinical nurse educator who took me under her wing during those overwhelming first months. Jessica had 23 years of experience, a master's degree in nursing education, and a reputation for developing some of the hospital's most competent staff. "Abigail, you have natural instincts for quality improvement," she'd told me during my 6-month review. "I want to nominate you for our professional development committee. The stipend isn't much, but the experience will be invaluable for your career growth." I trusted her judgment completely. Jessica had guided me through my first code blue, helped me navigate the complex politics of interdisciplinary rounds, and celebrated when I received my first quality achievement bonus. She handled the distribution of all quality metric bonuses and committee participation stipends for our unit, a responsibility that required meticulous attention to detail and absolute integrity. The committee work she described sounded exactly like the kind of professional development I needed. Quality improvement initiatives, policy review sessions, and strategic planning meetings would enhance my understanding of hospital operations beyond direct patient care. When the first stipend payment appeared in my paycheck, I felt grateful for her mentorship and the opportunities she was creating for my advancement. Over the following months, Jessica would update me on committee decisions and policy changes, always framing the information as if I'd been present for the discussions. "Remember how we talked about the new medication reconciliation protocol?" she'd say. Or, "That point you raised about staffing ratios really resonated with administration." I assumed these were references to informal conversations we'd had, her way of incorporating my input into formal committee processes. The pattern continued for nearly 2 years. Monthly stipend payments arrived with my regular salary, and Jessica would brief me on committee activities with the casual familiarity of shared experiences. She spoke about my contributions to quality initiatives with such conviction that I began to feel like an integral part of the hospital's improvement efforts, even though I couldn't recall attending specific meetings. The first crack in my trust appeared during a conversation with Kenneth Morrison, one of the ICU charge nurses. We were discussing the new patient safety protocols when he mentioned seeing me at a Quality Improvement Committee meeting the previous Tuesday. "I wasn't at any meeting Tuesday," I told him. "I was covering your evening shift, remember? You had that family emergency." Kenneth looked confused. "But Jessica mentioned your input on the fall prevention initiative. She said you presented some compelling data about our unit's metrics." I felt a strange flutter of, but dismissed it as a miscommunication. Perhaps Jessica had presented my ideas on my behalf, or Kenneth had misunderstood the context. These kinds of mix-ups happen frequently in a busy hospital environment. The second incident occurred 3 weeks later during a staff meeting. Dr. Catherine Blackwood, our unit medical director, thanked me for my work on the Professional Development Committee's mentorship program. "I appreciate the time you've invested in developing our new nurse orientation protocols," she said. "The committee minutes show extensive contributions from you over the past several months." I nodded politely, but internally I was scrambling to understand what she meant. I hadn't worked on any orientation protocols, and I certainly hadn't attended committee meetings to discuss them. After the meeting, I approached Jessica privately. "Dr. Blackwood mentioned committee minutes with my contributions," I said carefully. "I'm having trouble remembering some of the specific meetings she referenced." Jessica's response was smooth and immediate. "You know how hectic things get. Sometimes I incorporate your ideas from our informal discussions into the formal committee reports. Your insights are too valuable not to share with the broader team." Her explanation seemed reasonable, even flattering. Jessica had always been generous about crediting others for collaborative work, but something about her tone felt different, more rehearsed than spontaneous. The third incident shattered my remaining doubts. I was reviewing my pay stub in late October when I noticed the committee's stipend payment for a week when I'd been on vacation in Colorado. The dates were unmistakable because I'd specifically requested that time off to attend my sister's wedding. I pulled up my calendar and cross-referenced the payment dates with my scheduled time off. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Committee stipends appeared during vacation weeks, sick days, and shifts when I'd been covering for other units. The payments were consistent and substantial, nearly $800 over the past 6 months for meetings I'd never attended. That evening, I accessed the hospital's committee management system through our Epic portal. The login credentials Jessica had provided months earlier still worked, giving me access to meeting minutes and attendance records. What I found made my hands shake as I scrolled through page after page of fabricated documentation. My name appeared as present at meetings during times when I'd been providing direct patient care in completely different parts of the hospital. Detailed minutes included my supposed contributions to discussions about policies I'd never heard of. Professional Development Committee sessions showed my active participation in debates about initiatives I knew nothing about. The documentation was sophisticated and thorough. Someone had invested considerable time and effort into creating a fictional version of my professional involvement. The writing style and the attributed comments matched my usual communication patterns, suggesting intimate knowledge of how I expressed ideas and approached problems. I spent the next week quietly investigating, cross-referencing payment records with my actual work schedule. The moxa was overwhelming and undeniable. For nearly 2 years, someone had been systematically falsifying my committee participation while collecting stipend payments in my name. The realization that Jessica was responsible felt like a physical blow. She had access to all the necessary systems, intimate knowledge of my schedule and communication style, and complete control over stipend distributions. More devastating than the financial fraud was the betrayal of trust from someone I'd considered a mentor and friend. The hospital's night shift provided cover for my investigation, but it also amplified the isolation I felt as the scope of the deception became clear. Walking through the familiar corridors where Jessica and I had shared countless conversations about professional growth and ethical practice, I struggled to reconcile the person I thought I knew with the systematic fraud I'd uncovered. The weight of the discovery pressed down on me as I sat in my office that Thursday evening, surrounded by printouts of falsified meeting minutes and payment records. The betrayal cut deeper than simple theft. It represented a violation of everything I believed about professional integrity and the mentorship relationship that had shaped my early career. As I prepared to leave the hospital that night, I knew that confronting this betrayal would require courage I wasn't sure I possessed. But the check was undeniable, and my silence would only enable the continuation of a fraud that undermined the very foundations of professional trust. The confrontation couldn't wait any longer. Friday morning arrived with the weight of inevitable action, and I found myself standing outside Jessica's office at 7:30, clutching a manila folder containing copies of all that I'd gathered. The familiar nameplate on her door, Jessica Jackson, Clinical Nurse Educator, seemed to mock the trust I'd placed in her guidance over the years. She looked up from her computer with the same warm smile that had welcomed me countless times before. "Abigail, you're here early. Coffee? We need to talk." I closed the door behind me and took the chair across from her desk, the same seat where she'd offered career advice and celebrated my professional milestones. About the committee stipends. The change in her expression was subtle, but unmistakable. A slight tightening around her eyes, a pause that lasted a heartbeat too long. "What about them?" I opened the folder and placed the first document on her desk. "This shows payments for committee participation I never attended, meetings I wasn't even invited to." My voice remained steady despite the tremor I felt inside. "There are dozens of them, Jessica, going back almost 2 years. She glanced at the paper, then back at me with practiced confusion. "There must be some mistake in the system. You know how unreliable Epic can be with administrative records." I thought so too. I placed another document beside the first, until I found the meeting minutes with my name attached to comments I never made. Comments written in my voice, discussing policies I've never reviewed. They spread across her desk like an accusation. Someone with intimate knowledge of my communication style created these. Someone who knew my schedule well enough to select meetings I couldn't possibly attend. The silence stretched between us, filled with the distant sounds of the hospital coming to life, elevator chimes, overhead pages, the soft conversations of staff beginning their shifts. Jessica's hands remained folded on her desk, but I noticed the slight tremor in her fingers. "The stipend distribution system requires your authorization," I continued. "Every payment, every committee assignment, every meeting invitation flows through your approval. You're the only person with both the access and the knowledge necessary to orchestrate this." She leaned back in her chair, and for a moment, I saw a flash of something that might have been relief, as if the burden of deception had finally become too heavy to carry. "Abigail, you have to understand. I understand that you've been stealing from me for 2 years. The words came out sharper than I intended. I understand that every conversation we've had about professional integrity was a lie, while you were actively defrauding the hospital and betraying my trust. It wasn't supposed to go on this long." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "It started with just one payment when I was having financial difficulties. I thought I could replace it before anyone noticed. But you didn't stop there. The system made it so easy. No one ever audited the committee payments, and you were always so busy with your regular duties that I knew you wouldn't notice the extra deposits." She looked down at her hands. "I told myself I was borrowing, that I'd find a way to pay it back." The admission hung in the air between us, confirming what I'd already known but somehow making it worse. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated, ongoing fraud that had required planning and deliberate deception. How much? I asked. $37,400. The precision of the number suggested she'd been keeping careful track of her theft. I have records of every payment. The amount staggered me. Nearly 2 years of my salary, stolen through a system designed to reward professional development and committee service. Money that should have supported my own financial goals, my student loan payments, my future. I need to report this, I said, gathering the documents back into the folder. Please, Abigail, let me handle this internally. I can arrange repayment. Submit corrected records. No one else has to know. Someone else already knows. I stood, clutching the folder against my chest like armor. I've documented everything. The hospital administration needs to be aware that their stipend system has been compromised. Her composure finally cracked. This will destroy my career. 23 years in nursing, 15 at Gateway Regional. My reputation, my pension, everything I've worked for. You should have considered that before you decided to steal from a colleague who trusted you. The walk to the hospital administration offices felt endless, each step echoing in the corridors that had once felt like home. I'd called ahead and arranged a meeting with Kenneth Martinez, the Director of Human Resources, and Kenneth Thompson, the Chief Financial Officer. The weight of the folder in my hand seemed to grow heavier with each floor I climbed. The administrative suite occupied the hospital's top floor, its polished surfaces and muted colors, a stark contrast to the clinical areas below. Kenneth Martinez greeted me in the conference room, his expression serious as I explained the reason for my visit. These are significant allegations, he said, after reviewing the initial documents. We'll need to conduct a thorough investigation before taking any action. Kenneth Thompson arrived 20 minutes later, his financial background evident in the methodical way he examined each piece of. The pattern is clear, he said finally. This represents systematic fraud involving hospital funds and falsification of official records. What happens next? I asked. We'll need to interview Jessica Jackson immediately, Martinez replied. The hospital's policy requires suspension pending investigation for any allegations involving financial misconduct. We'll also need to audit the entire stipend system to determine if other employees have been affected. The investigation moved swiftly. By Monday morning, Jessica had been placed on administrative leave, and the hospital had engaged an external auditing firm to review all committee-related payments for the past 3 years. The scope of the fraud was limited to my stipends, but the systematic nature of the deception had shaken confidence in the oversight systems. Diana Rodriguez from the hospital's legal department became my primary contact during the investigation. Her thorough approach and genuine concern for the impact on my career provided stability during the uncertain weeks that followed. The you gathered was crucial, she told me during one of our meetings. Without your documentation, this could have continued indefinitely. The hardest part wasn't the investigation or the paperwork. It was the daily reality of working in an environment where everyone knew about the betrayal. Colleagues who had respected Jessica's expertise struggled to reconcile her professional reputation with the Asta fraud. Some offered support, others maintained careful distance, unsure how to navigate the situation. Kenneth Davis, a nurse manager from the cardiac unit, became an unexpected ally. I've seen what happens when these things get swept under the rug, he told me one afternoon in the break room. You did the right thing, even though it wasn't easy. His support meant more than he probably realized. The isolation that came with being the whistleblower in a close-knit professional community was harder to bear than I'd anticipated. 3 weeks after my initial report, Jessica submitted her resignation. The hospital accepted it in lieu of termination, though the investigation continued to determine the full scope of the financial impact. The external audit confirmed that the fraud was limited to my stipends, but recommended significant changes to the oversight and approval processes for all committee-related payments. The resolution brought a mixture of relief and sadness. Justice had been served, the stolen funds would be recovered through Jessica's pension and benefits, and the hospital had implemented stronger safeguards. But the cost had been the destruction of a mentorship relationship that had shaped my early career, and the loss of trust in someone I genuinely respected. Standing in the same corridor where Jessica and I had walked together countless times, discussing patient care and professional development, I felt the weight of what had been lost. The betrayal had been personal, but its impact extended far beyond the stolen money. It had shattered my faith in the very relationships that made healthcare work possible. The investigation was concluding, but the real work of rebuilding trust and moving was just beginning.